Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum. More specifically, we're going to be discussing the ETH Bitcoin valuation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. The ETH Bitcoin valuation is obviously something we follow quite closely on this channel. It is currently at around 0.038. We can find a low here back in April of 2025 when Ethereum went home. So when it went to its lower logarithmic regression trend line on its USD pair, right? If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, I will just pull it up here for completeness so that you know if you're like a first-time viewer to the channel, then this is essentially what I'm talking about when I say Ethereum went to its regression line, right? And so we know that all of these major lows by ETH in the regression band, these lows have corresponded to pretty significant lows for ETH Bitcoin, right? So when you look at this chart, right, you can see there's some major lows for ETH Bitcoin every couple of years or so, right? You have the one in 2016 or late 2015, late 2016. You also have this low here in 2019 and of course in early 2020. And then we got the one right there in April of 2025. And a lot of these lows that I just pointed out on the Bitcoin chart correspond to Ethereum going to its regression band on its USD chart. Now, remember, when Ethereum does break down from these support lines and go to its regression band, that's when ETH Bitcoin normally bottoms out. And so because of that, that's why I'm operating under the assumption that ETH has bottomed against Bitcoin for this market cycle. Now, with that said, we are coming up onto, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is coming into some levels here that might be a little bit tricky for a little while. As I've said before, I do think the ETH Bitcoin valuation will likely continue to go up. But if you're familiar with Bitcoin dominance, I expect a reversal by dominance in September. So I think it makes sense to assume, in my opinion, that dominance will see, so Bitcoin dominance, I believe, will see a reversal in September. And in order for it to really see a reversal, you're going to need to see ETH Bitcoin find a local top. A lot of Septembers have been, marked milestones for Bitcoin dominance. It tends to sort of reverse course. Whatever direction it's going into it tends to kind of bottom out or top out and then head back the other way. We've seen this happen many, many times. And so I think that this time will likely not be different. And you will see at least a local low on Bitcoin dominance around that September timeframe, which means that there's a good chance that ETH will likely find a local top against Bitcoin around that timeframe. Now, one of the interesting things about this move is that you can also see that ETH found a very similar low on its Bitcoin pair in April of 2020 as well, right? So you have this March and April low, and kind of a similar level. And then after that, what you'll notice is that then the ETH Bitcoin valuation went up to about 0.038. I mean, basically the same level that it just went to and it's currently at. That's where it went in August and September of 2020. And you can see we're at a very similar level right now. I've often said I think that you could see Ethereum wick to new all-time highs before you see a larger correction, both by Bitcoin and the ETH Bitcoin valuation. I could be wrong about that, obviously. But if it does play out like that move, then you could see that wick to that level above the 0.04 level could occur again very late August. That one actually occurred the first day of September, but it was the week that started the last week of August. So I'm still looking at that as a possibility here where the ETH Bitcoin valuation, kind of just hangs out around these levels for a little bit maybe wicks up to above 0.04 and then drops back down potentially to the bull market support band, where I think it will attempt to form a higher low. So that is the way I think this is going to play out. It's always nice to see the ETH Bitcoin valuation move, especially for those that, were watching this entire downtrend for so long. And even for the people that were on the right side of that downtrend. I mean, we talked about that downtrend the entire ways. And even though recognizing that that was happening, it was still a difficult time to be an ETH holder, just watching it bleed back to Bitcoin. And I would caution people, if you are an ETH maxi, I would really caution you against the idea of believing in the flippening. While it is true that ETH has been putting in higher lows against Bitcoin from one cycle to another, it's equally important to recognize that it's also been putting in lower highs. And so I think there's a lot of talking heads right now going on and on and on about the flippening and whatnot, but I think your mental energy is probably better spent elsewhere than assuming that something like that's going to happen. I think it makes more sense to assume that it's going to be more or less the same, and that ETH will likely put in a lower high against Bitcoin again. And if you assume differently, you're basically assuming that this time will be different. And the reality is it probably won't be. If you look at a fib retracement on these levels, right, you can see that one of the levels I've sort of caught up before, a couple of them like 0.044 and of course 0.053, those could be levels that are pretty important for the ETH Bitcoin valuation. You can even see the wicks over here in 2021 would actually correspond to that 0.044 level. But what I'm thinking right now, and you can actually go over to the year-to-date ROI and look at asset pairs, and you can go over to the ETH Bitcoin valuation and just get an idea of what it's done so far this year, and then what it did in 2024, and then what it did in 2023. So at this point this year, ETH is outperforming Bitcoin, right? Which was not true in 2023 and 2024 at this point. So this year has played out a little bit differently for Ethereum. One of the reasons that might be the case is because of this brutal capitulation by the ETH Bitcoin valuation that happened in 2025. That's what allowed Ethereum to go home, and then it's had a lot more momentum. And you could argue it was because it went home that it had the momentum in the first place to finally break above, that $4,000 level. And so when I think about a chart like the ETH Bitcoin valuation, I think it looks constructive, but what I'd really like to see is a high, a local top form sometime over the next 2 to 3 weeks, probably by the end of the month or very early next month. I'd like to see a local top put in, followed by a retrace back down to a higher low, and then hopefully another move up after that. That's what I'm looking for right now as it relates to the ETH Bitcoin valuation. And obviously, the strength on that will obviously affect ETH USD, right? Because you have certain altcoins right now that are even going into new cycle highs or new yearly highs, even though Bitcoin is $10,000 below its yearly or its cycle high. So keep an eye on the ETH Bitcoin valuation here at around 0.038. I'm going to guess there's going to be some resistance whenever you see a 0.04 on the chart. When you see 0.04, it might wick a little bit higher, but I do think there's going to be a retracement after that. Just remember that, if it plays out like this, you could have some deeper retracements as well, right? That last more than just a week or two. Obviously, people look at 2017 as something to at least compare to. But remember, some of the big turning points for the ETH Bitcoin back then, right? There was one big turning point where it went back up. That didn't actually happen until, November, December. So if there is, if ETH Bitcoin does turn around, like if it does something like this where it then drops back down, you might not really expect it to turn back the other way until November, December timeframe, right? If you're following the ETH Bitcoin valuation. So those are at least my views right now. ETH Bitcoin still looks good, still looks constructive. Thinking because I have a bias about Bitcoin dominance bouncing in September and October, I think it makes sense to assume that ETH will likely find a local top in September on its Bitcoin pair, right? And, the next couple of weeks on its Bitcoin pair, go down a little bit into September to October, and then perhaps bounce on its Bitcoin pair again in sort of the November to December timeframe. That's what I'm looking for with regards to the ETH Bitcoin valuation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.